In a quiet town where nothing much ever happens, one Thursday morning turned into a moment no one inside Miller's diner would ever forget. An 81-year-old Vietnam veteran, wearing his service medals with quiet pride, was humiliated in front of a room full of strangers by a man half his age and twice as loud. The veteran didn't shout, he didn't fight back. Instead, he sent a simple two-word text. 22 minutes later, the front door opened, and the man who walked in made sure the day didn't end the way that biker thought it would. Narrator: It was 8:12 a.m., late spring. Outside, the streets of Millbrook were still slick from a night of light rain. The air was cool. Narrator: It was 8:12 a.m., late spring. Outside, the streets of Millbrook were still slick from a night of light rain. The air was cool and clean, carrying the faint smell of damp earth. Sunlight broke through the gaps in the elm trees lining Main Street, casting striped shadows across the pavement. Miller's Diner had been serving breakfast since 1954, a squat brick building with a red neon coffee cup glowing in the window. Every time the door opened, the smell of bacon, coffee, and freshly toasted bread escaped into the street. Inside, it was warm and familiar. A radio in the kitchen played a country song from the 70s, the sound blending with the quiet hum of conversation. Plates clinked, coffee poured, forks scraped across plates. The regulars knew their spots. At the counter, two truckers in faded baseball caps discussed the rising cost of diesel. By the front window, Mrs. Crawford sat with her crossword puzzle, tea in hand. And in the back corner, beneath a framed American flag, sat James Whitaker, 81 years old, wearing a light brown jacket, neatly pressed slacks, and a modest display of military service medals pinned to his chest, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Vietnam Service Ribbon. Witness voiceover. He came every Thursday, same table, same breakfast. He was quiet, polite, always asked about your day. You'd never know he'd been through a war unless you noticed the way he carried himself. Narrator: James was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1966, just 19 years old. Like many young men of his generation, he left behind a small-town life and a family who prayed for his safe return. In Vietnam, he served as a combat engineer, building roads, clearing mines, and operating in some of the most dangerous zones. His unit called him calm under fire, dependable when things went bad. During his second tour, his unit was ambushed. Under heavy fire, James carried a wounded soldier nearly half a mile to safety, earning him the Bronze Star for bravery. But the rescue came at a cost. Shrapnel tore through his leg, leaving him with a limp that stayed with him for life. When he returned to Millbrook, he married his high school sweetheart, Linda. They had one child, a son named Mark. James rarely spoke about the war, except to share lessons about discipline, loyalty, and respect. He taught Mark that strength wasn't about throwing the first punch. It was about knowing when not to. Mark grew up to follow in his father's footsteps, joining the Army in his early 20s and serving overseas. James was proud, though he didn't show it with big speeches, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing his son had chosen a path of service. Narrator: At 8:18 a.m., the steady rhythm of the diner was interrupted by the low growl of a motorcycle engine. Outside, a tall figure in a black leather jacket dismounted a heavy cruiser bike and walked toward the entrance. His name was Kyle Mercer, 6'2", broad-shouldered, with tattoos curling up from his wrists and a reputation that made most people keep their distance. His jacket bore skull patches and flames, the insignia of a loose biker group known more for late-night bar fights than charity rides. Kyle pushed open the door with enough force to make it bang against the wall. He walked to the counter, ordered a coffee, extra hot, and then scanned the room. His eyes landed on James in the back corner. Witness voiceover. You could see it in his face. He wanted to make trouble. Some guys just can't stand seeing a man like James get respect. Narrator: Kyle walked straight over to James's table. No introduction, no handshake. He leaned down, said something too low for most to hear, and then, without warning, slapped James across the face. The sound was sharp, almost like a book slamming shut. Every head in the diner turned. A fork clinked onto a plate. The waitress froze mid-step, coffee pot in hand. James didn't flinch, he didn't shout, he didn't even raise his hand. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small flip phone, and typed 2 words. He set the phone down, picked up his fork, and went back to his scrambled eggs. Narrator. For the next 22 minutes, the diner was wrapped in a heavy silence. Kyle smirked and took a seat at a nearby table. He ordered pancakes and chatted loudly with the waitress, trying to act as if nothing had happened. But the room felt tense, like a storm waiting to break. James ate slowly, his expression calm, his eyes occasionally drifting to the clock on the wall. Nobody dared to ask what he'd texted. A couple of regulars exchanged uneasy glances. The waitress avoided Kyle's table as much as possible. Even the sizzling of the grill seemed muted under the weight of what had just happened. Narrator. At 8:40 a.m., the bell above the door jingled. In stepped Mark Whitaker, army uniform pressed, boots polished, posture perfect. Behind him, 5 more soldiers walked in, all on leave from the nearby base. The atmosphere in the diner shifted immediately. Kyle looked up from his pancakes. The smirk faded. Mark walked directly to his father's table, placed a hand on his shoulder, and turned to face Kyle. "I heard you had something to say to my father," he said evenly, his voice carrying across the room. The soldiers stood quietly behind him, their presence alone sending a clear message. No weapons, no threats, just a silent wall of respect and strength. Narrator. Kyle's confidence drained in seconds. He muttered something about just joking, grabbed his jacket, and tossed a few bills onto the table. Without meeting anyone's eyes, he walked out. Moments later, the sound of his motorcycle roared down Main Street and faded away. Inside, no one spoke for a moment. Then, slowly, the normal sounds returned, the clink of cutlery, the low murmur of conversation, the faint hum of the kitchen radio. Narrator. James finished his breakfast without comment. Mark sat with him, ordering a coffee, and they spoke quietly while the soldiers outside laughed and swapped stories before heading back to base. The incident became a kind of local legend not because of violence, but because of how it ended without it. It was a lesson in respect, in loyalty, and in the truth James had lived by all his life. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. And sometimes, the strongest stand is the one taken in silence. Some say Kyle never came back to Millbrook. Others claim they saw him weeks later, looking over his shoulder in a roadside bar. But what happened to James and Mark next is a story even more unbelievable than the diner incident. It began with an unexpected letter, delivered in the dead of night, and it would pull them into a chain of events no one in town could have predicted. That's the story I'll tell you in the next episode. This leaves the audience curious and emotionally invested without revealing too much.